Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello, welcome back. This is the Blockchain Show, episode 230. It's a great honor to welcome Daniel Matalon, the founder of Is There Enough and the co-founder of Impact Launchpad. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
It's really great to be here, Ethan. 230 shows. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. I'll be honest. Lately, it's been a challenge. It feels like whenever the crypto markets take a huge dive, that's when the show. I feel like we need conversations like we're going to have today the most, because I feel like the technology is so important and it often gets kind of overshadowed by the speculation and the gambling aspect of crypto. But anyways,
in that interest, I'm curious, do you have like a theme that pops up most in your 230 shows as you look in the rearview mirror?
Well, the original goal was demystifying blockchain and technology. It's kind of become more educational and shifting towards, speaking to individuals like yourself who are, using the technology to make a change, or those who can comment on that. So I think, I'd say the focus is more on the use cases of how it can help us instead of just make some people richer. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I think we're at the very heart of humanity figuring out what wealth is, not just what money is, which was about the closest definition we had. And a big propellant of that has been the democratization that's come through blockchain. So I don't have anything to speak about technically. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of management experience in technology, but I attempt to be an explainer of things to myself first, and then hopefully, to others. And I think one thing that blockchain hasn't really fully assumed the mantle of, as much as the rest of the world could understand, which is the mantle of agreement. We think agreement is a cousin to war, the opposite of war. That what humans do after they get through warring is they make agreement. Is the agreement, other than the munitions during the war, everybody makes money after the war, so to speak, as a stand-in for the story of humanity, if you like. So every increment of focus on agreement actually builds what wealth really is when it comes to really putting food on the table. It's not just a philosophical or a spiritual connection of agreement, which is a wonderful thing to experience, but to actually put food on the table, agreement is what really builds wealth, not resources. And whether you're talking about blockchain or not, that's just a truth by itself. And then measuring the old financial system versus the new financial system, which one is more predilection to build wealth? Everybody who's listening to our voices now understands the answer to that. But I'm not sure we're painting that picture to people who are still looking at it from a place of fear.
That's very well said. Early on in the show, we did focus on the concept of money quite a bit, which was a pretty fun exploration, because it gets a little bit slippery the further you go back to the roots of money. And even now, when I talk with friends about inflation or causes of different things like that, it's still it's almost like an abstract idea that it impacts people's lives so much that I just wish that there was a better understanding about money and like you said, wealth. That's I don't know if you want to expand on just what wealth is, because maybe some people listening don't really understand fully what that means.
Well, at the level that I think you're asking the question, I don't think anybody in the human race knows what it means. Let's just start from there. I think we can start to try to identify that. The question you ask, a person asks in a situation, has a lot to do with the outcome, right? So even asking what wealth is versus money is already a step to understanding it. But I think we should be very humble that our financial system is born out of war and conflict for survival, for necessity. You and I both of us come from 70,000 years of war, or we wouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing quote unquote wrong until now, when it has the potential to be a threat to human survival. Because war happens in a lot of other ways, not just with guns. Who gets access to something or doesn't is also a form of war, right? And so I think the question that we begin to ask, I like to jump off of Buckminster Fuller for a definition of wealth. And Buckminster Fuller, for those who don't know his name, you can look him up. He's best known for the designer of the geodesic dome and so many other things that we could spend a few hours talking about him, which I won't do. But he said that wealth is whatever your standard of living is, multiplied by the number of days you can sustain that standard of living. That's your real wealth. Money is a big part of that, but it's not the whole picture. And when I tell people that, I say, if you were going from Bermuda to Jamaica and you could only see 90% of the sky, you would not end up in Jamaica. You'd be off course somewhere pretty soon, right? And so the fact that we define money first and buy wealth with it, because under his definition, if you have money, you can buy survival over time, standard of living over time, which means your choices, right? So it seems to me that if it's your standard of living, then it means how much choice can you express in your life? If I'm living at home in my parents' place, I can exercise more choice with less money than if I have to pay rent somewhere else, based on my relationship with my parents or some friend or whatever it is, right? And so ultimately, that sort of wealth is only ever created by agreement. And if you really want to get to what money is and all the origins you found, and is it abstract, as if abstract isn't real, but abstract is real if we agree on it, right? Money is an agreement. Gold standard was an agreement. And blockchain is a consensus technology. Whatever it is, proof of this, proof of that, it's consensus around the proof that makes it valuable and trustworthy, not trustless, if you get the dig.
Yeah, there's important distinctions. I think the vocabulary is kind of really, really crucial. And I've definitely made mistakes on word choice on this podcast before. Something I try to be careful about, but yeah, I really liked your answer. That's
Can we explore this, what you just said about language itself? Because I think we look at language and conversation as just talk, but language itself creates things that actually move in a certain direction for good or ill. Buckminster Fuller, expand on him a little bit. All of our work is really derivative of him, to be clear for those interested in us. But Buckminster Fuller, in sort of posing of all the tools of mankind, he was a naval engineer, architect of great renown, precision person, right? And he said of all the tools we'd ever invented, he said language was the highest of everything that had been invented. This is a guy who had 50 predictions for the year 2000, 49 of the 50 came true. One of the greatest 100 minds of all time, for sure. And he said that language was the greatest tool we had. All we're saying is certain kinds of language and conversation bring clarity and some muddies. Certain kinds brings conflict and some brings collaboration and agreement. And it's up to us to figure out for ourselves what that distinction is between your and my 70,000 years of war and whatever we replace it with.
That's really interesting. Sometimes I used to subscribe to the idea of genetic memory and, having all those years of warfare in our genes, does it do something to us that in the modern age we're no longer expressing, and not having that outlet, does it contribute to anything? And just some ideas I've had. I think exercise is pretty important to kind of get rid of some of that energy. But sorry,
it's a very
going off
thoughtful set
topic.
of questions that you're posing. Really is. It's very evolutionary for you to even pose them.
Yeah, it's definitely. I hate saying this, 'cause I say it all the time. An interesting time to be alive. I feel like it's definitely one of the best, if not the best, time to be alive. We're seeing so much. There is a lot of change happening. I do a lot of reading in this space. It's really all I can do, observing, talking to people like yourself. And I'm hopeful that this can be used, like we can get to the point of, uh, self-governance, self-sovereign identity. And I feel like this is a really good mechanism to get there. I had a fear for a while that it was kind of get hijacked by maybe groups of people with maybe not the best intentions. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the developers who are writing this code, and they're the one. They're like the soldiers in the war. They're the ones who are writing the code, and hopefully they're on the right side of things.
And I think people like yourself and myself and lots of others like us are also posing the ethical questions that go with the writing of that code, right? Because the code is supposed to support humanity, not the other way around, hopefully, if we do it right. And I'm very averse to thinking anything is a silver bullet. I usually like to have 1,000 flowers blooming if it's an important enough topic, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we do a little too much arguing with each other about what's the best way rather than how many ways can we put at the problem, and let the data decide. But that being said, I will say that the white knight here is decentralization. You even took a look at the recent failures of crypto lenders. There's CeFi, not DeFi, that have gotten into trouble, right? One thing we know about is so far, what we're seeing is that DeFi is creating safety. And I think that stands in for the whole blockchain evolution that's going on in technology. But I prefer in language where I have the opportunity to talk about shared authority in the blockchain before I explain decentralization. I'm really interested in how we reach people that have no exposure to blockchain and have them understand its attraction, and then sort of incentivize them to want to study it and dig into it like you did, like I did, to whatever degree we did to be here. And I think part of that is talking about self-government, talking about shared authority. These are the things that are the really big impacts that blockchain make. Money is just one of the forms of it. Any new technology throughout history, money and sex are the first things we point the technology to. But then its real impact is once we see it in a historical perspective. And I am very interested in governments not dissolving, but governments are dissolving whether I like it or not. I much would prefer that institutions are strong, that when they're failing and weak, that we rebuild them, not take them down. That being said, I also think today it's possible, even for those who want to take down the old system or those who want to repair it like I do, or whatever the case may be, we still have the capability to agree that we could build a new one that makes the old one irrelevant. Again, that's a Buckminster Fuller interpretation that I take. Like, as an engineer, he says it's much better to create a new reality than fight the existing one. For all you Web3 thinkers out there.
Yeah, really, really fascinating. I need to listen to some more Buckminster Fuller, clearly.
Yeah, we're the pop campaign for Buckminster Fuller, basically. Like, we can, and that comes because it was made accessible to me by some really great teachers 25 and 30 years ago who were students of his. So I'm sort of an intellectual grandson lineage, if you will. And basically, we're working on the world game. The world game model is defined by Buckminster Fuller as how to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest time possible, through spontaneous collaboration, and without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone. That's his carefully chosen words for the expression of the world game. A world game to replace a war game, because you can't have war without a war game. And his proposition, as I would interpret it, is you can't build a world that works without making a game of how the world works. So we're playing that game in a conversational way. And we're doing that with this accidental question I stumbled onto, which is there enough? So we take how to make the world work for 100% of money, that whole description he made, and we just boil it down to a provocation, a question, a challenge. Is there enough? And I asked it sort of in that exasperated way the first time I ever uttered it. And the reaction in the room was really remarkable. And in weeks, my life changed remarkably, like introductions in places I had no access to before. And suddenly I was like a guy who's been playing playing instruments for 30 years, and he suddenly writes a one-hit wonder or something like that. And something happened with people examining this question of enoughness, which is different than abundance. You hear the question, is there enough? Somebody tells you about it, which is, a conversation in 22 countries with, thousands of people now in an offline social research sort of context, thousands of hours, all of that. And when we have asked this question, is there enough? There's no two people that answer it the same. It's like as unique as a fingerprint. And for some reason, I guess it's obvious now, people want to keep having the conversation, because applying the measure of enough to, is there enough water? Is there enough justice? Is there enough blockchain literacy? Is a wonderful way to frame a conversation. It puts everybody sort of on the same page in this surprising way. And so this conversation of is there enough, and the examination of it has turned out to be a tool of collaboration conversationally. And since so much of our conversation has conflict, automatically, right? If you ever listen on social audio and some guy says, here's my life's work for 20 years, and he spends 2 to 5 beautiful minutes describing the essence of his work, and then someone else will speak up and go, I agree with 90% of that, and then go right into the 10% they disagree with. This is how our conversation, even in non-political places, just automatically, just because we start with our difference from each other before we start with our sameness. It's sort of weird to start with the sameness. I've had to sort of teach myself to do it and then go to the uniqueness. But what I discovered is that over time, when I taught myself how to start with sameness, I ended up with even more of a uniqueness and appreciation for each of our uniquenesses between me and the other person I'm speaking to. So this, to us, is the parallel between our conversation and blockchain. Blockchain is a system of consensus with very different rules and regulations on how consensus, of course, is arrived at, governance, all of that stuff. But that's in essence what it is. And we're having a linguistic conversation and approach to people's basic as well as global needs, and saying, okay, whatever we think there's not enough of in the world, which there's plenty of, not enoughness, what do we do about that? And we're either going to fight over it or we're going to make an agreement. And if we fight over it, aren't we going to end up making an agreement at some point when the fight is over? So we've just wasted a lot of blood, treasure, and time. Time is something humanity doesn't have very much of in some sense of the threats to our existence. So we've wasted all of that. Why don't we try making agreement and skipping the war instead? I believe that's what Buckminster Fuller meant by the world game.
Yeah, I meant to ask you about the world game.
It's a real life game. And I believe that the conclusion anybody would ever come to in really attempting to play it is that the way in which you win the world game is to get everybody involved in the world game. And every increment you do towards everyone being involved in the world game is winning the world game. I showed this to one of my mentors who worked with Buckminster Fuller extensively in the 70s, produced him in concert basically to audiences and things like that. And she was part of a group that founded pretty respectable NGO called the Hunger Project, back in the late 70s. And it came out of a very popular and then went through some controversial reputation and then regained it. But a program in the 70s called EST, which is based on the work of Werner Erhard. Werner Erhard and Buckminster Fuller were very friendly at the end of Buckminster Fuller's life. Anyway, they founded the Hunger Project. And she said, when the Hunger Project was introduced, somebody at the back of the room, because they were just a seminar company at the time, and somebody at the back of the room said, how are we going to end world hunger? And Werner Erhard said, the first thing we're going to do is persuade people it can be done. We think our job is to persuade humanity in whatever increment we can do. And we welcome support, donations, all of that as a communications, nonprofit, social good on this conversation part, is to bring about a conversation that allows people to realize they have a part to play, not only in making the world work for 100% of humanity, but even using that concept to make the world work for 100% of them and their family, the whole concept of 100% is so the opposite of war and conflict. You can't end up with anything but a good outcome out of that approach.
I'd like to learn a little bit more about the two. I don't know if you can expand any more on those and
sure.
how they were formed and all that.
Sure. I think the simplest way to understand is that Impact Launchpad is a social impact venture studio, a for-profit entity that participates in the general overall ecosystem of social impact for-profit companies based out of the UK. Along the way of its formation, the Is There Enough conversation was an accidental utterance that happened because I was enrolling investors and other sorts of resource interests in launching the kinds of models we wanted to see to help us finance all that, so on and so forth. And in the process of that, uttered this question, is there enough, into conversation with investors. And within a few weeks of that happening, as I think I mentioned earlier, lots of transformation began to change. And the blockchain came knocking at my door, inviting me to take part in communications and promotion and media related to some, ambitious blockchain projects, because we were having this conversation about agreement that was so attractive to helping people feel good and safe about blockchain in general. Over time, it evolved to produce various kinds of experience and activities that basically make Is There Enough a agreement academy, let's say, and a pop conversation related to the work of Buckminster Fuller and many others. And so Is There Enough is sort of like a conversational game that people play with each other, where they ask each other what enough is, and we give them sort of some models of how we do that. And so it's become this giant social research project, because we intend to launch a product out of Is There Enough, which will have an NFT associated with it. But the purpose of this product is to create a treaty, something we want respected as a treaty, not a pledge, not a petition, I should say, but an actual digital treaty that will be issued to 100 million people, no more, no less, to establish an ethic in humanity by which we expect leadership and organizations and governments and businesses will simply be inhabited by people who have rippled from that culture, because all the treaty says, and we think it's the last treaty humanity will ever need to sign, because the only one that humanity's ever signed without nations. So it's really a completely decentralized piece of human constitutionality. And when we issue the certificates, people are making a treaty with themselves. Remember, we went back to you and I coming from 70,000 years of conflict. Maybe we're having our DNA, whatever. We make a choice, either one of us, if we sign this treaty, saying, thank you for all of that. I'm now doing the best I can for the rest of my life on behalf of myself, my tribe, and my humanity, to make agreement wherever I can and devote my life to that as a value. And so that product that we issue out of that will create a very large audience, of course. And so our plan is to create a media company out of that audience with content we have, from so much social research we've done now over a few years in 22 countries. to really bring about all sorts of entertainment, information, experiences, and events that can really, if you want to say proselytize agreement and nothing else. We have no other sort of aspirations or values or anything on the Is There Enough campaign, but it is a media studio devoted to that and will be a global television network. And so Impact Launchpad, in its efforts as a social impact venture studio, will partner with Is There Enough, a nonprofit, and the two together are going to launch a token which is called 100%. And so the way in which they work together is they're aligning the issuing of 100% token as a token for a world game business model. And the audience that's involved is going to own that studio, because the media studio combination, because the token is what's going to underwrite collaboration. Wherever we call it, we're emerging philosophically and ethically, but soon to be in terms of our technical build out as well. And this will be in our white paper in that sequence, kind of a manifesto along with a white paper, is to say, what can we do to measure and reward collaboration and agreement that didn't exist before? We don't know exactly what that looks like. Maybe there'll be people listening to this that like that idea, that contact us and say they've got some great ideas they'd like to contribute to that effort. And I will say this, to keep us out of the weeds of all of it, but to put clarity on it, what Is There Enough is doing is designed to be appropriated by people, to take our conversation, like I said, is there enough, and put it to, is there enough, women's suffrage in the world? Like that would be a whole other conversation. You can apply Is There Enough to any topic you want. And on Clubhouse, for those who are in Clubhouse and join our room on Clubhouse, you will see us program that way. There'll be always specific focuses, like is there enough truth and is there enough courage, the first two we're about to do on Clubhouse. But not only is There Enough meant to be appropriated, Ethan, but so is Impact Launchpad. Impact Launchpad is issuing a new financial instrument out of its activities to basically create ownerless impact funds in small enough but large enough increments, small enough to be safe but large enough to have some impact, and make it possible for our competitors to use our same financing model. You could call it open source social impact investing as a short idea. So whatever we do is made for the world to use, and then we get to use it too because it's our toy. That we authored but we don't own is sort of the mentality we have inside the building here.
I see a lot of hope in projects like yours. It's still a little bit unclear about how, I, the individual, could be of assistance. But I think that.
Pose that? Yeah. I'll tell you how individuals can make a positive difference in what we're furthering. Is to go to istthereenough.org and familiarize yourself with the treaty and ask yourself if you would be willing to want to live in a world where people had signed that. And if your answer is yes, then sign up for our pre-registration. That's all we're going to take in this period is pre-registrations, and there's going to be a whole special recognition and reward, of course, as traditionally you'd expect in anything blockchain related, for people who joined that. Because it speaks numbers to other people we're having conversations with of influence, and joining our social media in this case is particularly critical. And the second, maybe most important, is to actually experiment with having a conversation of Is There Enough with another person, which we can show somebody how to do. It takes 10 or 15 minutes, especially somebody like you, but basically these make material differences because our entire argument that we're making to the world is that there are people behind the idea, if possible, of making the world work. Never mind work for 100%. Let's just start with defining work, which I would say is more wealth made more available for more people. That's not an amorphous, vague thing. More wealth, as we defined it, made more available for more people, and that's a measurable thing. people actually sort of voting on this kind of activity brings us the reputation to be able to make very significant agreements around these directions and even work with significant institutions, because it shows that we're reaching people out there. But the best experience you can have is actually engaging it yourself. And you can even do it in a self-paced format on our website. We have a survey. It's a long form survey that asks you the question, is there enough that you can answer for yourself in your own time, is number one of what you can do. And I do want to just say one thing, like throughout this conversation, you and I have expressed separately a lot of positivity about living in this lifetime and the kinds of things that can be done. And sorry about our interruption there. I guess you'll have to cut that. But I do want to point to the fact that we respectively sort of talked about our positive outlook at a time where people are really friggin' scared, and legitimately so. The question we're really interested in beyond is there enough is what are we going to do about it? And I think, like, when I've gone around the world and asked this question, is there enough? It's been a representation of humanity. There are either people think we're screwed and there's nothing we can do if to sit back and wait for the world to destruct. And then people like ourselves who think that we're living in the most opportune time. And I think it's okay if you have a pessimistic view, because obviously we needed that to evolve in humanity, to have some pessimism. I think we're more positive than we are negative in that regard. But I think the way the pessimist can be part of the conversation is to get to the question of what are we going to do with this dilemma that we have right now? Because if your answer is just sit back and wait for the world to die, okay, then we know you're not part of the world game for sure. But if you still think that humanity has a chance, every little increment you do absolutely makes a difference, even if you don't see it and it doesn't happen in your lifetime.
Yeah, wow, that is very thought-provoking, because when I think about past treaties, Treaty of Versailles, or what was it, Potsdam? I can't remember the name of the treaty after World War II. You literally had to bring other nations to their knees and cripple them and force them into a position where they'd be willing to consider or accept different terms. And I love the concept of just circumventing all of that conflict, because
you're right. It's a preemptive treaty. I've never thought of it in the way you just framed that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'd imagine it might be in some sense more difficult because, and I can't really put my finger on why.
It's a story, a feasible story, I'll add, of humanity's future that's a little bit different than what a lot of us are walking around thinking is going to happen. And I'm one of those who can speak about it from both sides of this, right? In 2050, we're facing 1 billion people that will be homeless and without a passport. That's 28 years from now, right? Again, what's the question I'm really after behind is there enough is what are we going to do about it? Which is why Impact Launchpad exists, because we're financing infrastructure to address really big problems like that. And I think that the bigness of it is very overwhelming for us. And yet, Bucky Fuller said, I didn't set out to invent a geodesic dome. I might have invented flying shoes. I was just expressing the universe from looking at the biggest picture that I could. Loosely translated, it's not by any means word for word, my interpretation on the last part. But I think that when we pursue, back to this whole thing about the founding of the Hunger Project, is first persuading ourselves with a possibility question of how can it work, even if I don't have the answer today. It's really important for us to be willing to tolerate a little ambiguity to an answer if we're asking the right question. This is a key thing in strategy over adversity, rather than being a victim of circumstance, is to say, what could I do? And more that I ask it with other people, the more likely we're going to come up with the solution we haven't invented before.
Yeah.
And that's what we can do, is we can make conditions by which people can make better choices.
It's very good. I would much rather put my energy towards that than, going full on prepper and storing water and food for 25 years and just trying to.
It's not something I'm going to throw disdain at the same time, even though I'm not of that culture, obviously. As I said, the more I've gone down this road, it's like, how do we bring all these points of view into the same conversation, whatever conversation that is? And those people are there to remind us not to get too Pollyanna about what we're facing either. God bless them if there's a God.
I was in a men's group. I'm still in it, and it's basically Boy Scouts for grown men. And one of the activities is to it's like emergency preparedness, but it's stuff for like earthquakes and if the power goes out, will you be okay for 7 days? And then I think about that, like, man, all of our, at least where I live in Southern California, most of our power and communication lines are overhead, and all it takes is someone to hit a pole and we're out for hopefully no more than a day or two, but sometimes it sparks a fire and then we're evacuating. And then it's like, whoa, I wasn't prepared for this, so I think there has to be a balance, but, and
maybe your helium device is also, within that, within that mix of tools as well. So you can be online anyway, however, look, we've got to figure out how to have universal mobility and not have it be a threat to humanity. And I think that, that's a fascinating return conversation sometime for us to have as, sustainable aviation, the ability for people to live in multiple countries. These are things that are really important to human survival. It's not just a matter of human rights. It's as I said, it's a whole other deep dive conversation on this topic. But human survival, let me just say, human survival depends on our ability to make agreement better than we know how to do today. It really matters to that level. And I'm writing a book on this. It's called The First Agreement. And the First Agreement basically has a one idea thesis, which is that we are more threatened in our extinction battle, which is what it is that we're under right now, an extinction threat. We are more threatened by our inability to agree than we are by climate change and tribalism and inequality and all the other sort of ills that we want to address. Those aren't the threats. It's our inability to respond effectively, which I would determine is based on our inability to sufficiently agree. The thing you said about those treaties that are forced on people, they are set rules. To restate what you said, those are rules set by the winners. And that's why you have an inclusion problem. If you make the treaty come from human beings themselves, irrespective of nations, now you have something that leaders have to adhere to, because they will now come from that culture. And I tried this out in an age-appropriate way, this conversation with some kindergarten kids in Jamaica, and 3 months later, they were asking me to come back, and I only spent 15 minutes with them, and all I did was have a conversation with them about how they got their breakfast that morning. And it became a conversation about agreement. They got it so powerfully. So I think human beings are capable of adopting something to replace war with, but it isn't peace. Peace is a ripple of what war is replaced with. It's an effect. It's not a process. Anyway, that's our war and peace conversation.
Yeah. I love the, I guess it'd be like these are really good philosophical topics you bring up that I think they're important, and I hope people listening to this today will carry on this conversation with people in their lives. And
yes,
hopefully if there's developers listening, maybe they could devote their time and energy towards projects like this that could indeed make a difference. Definitely want to just give you the opportunity, if you'd like to, just to have the floor and leave us with anything that you'd like to, and ways to connect, ways to get involved, all of that.
I just would like to say that any attempt that somebody makes on framing a conversation of agreement over war in their life will lead to, over time, more capability, more agency. And that could be for selfish things like making more money, right? Maybe being better at agreement is pretty good, for your work life. It's very good for your relationship life. It's very good for your parenting life, right? All of that sort of thing. And I'm not proselytizing the way to great agreement and collaboration. We need 1,000 flowers blooming on ways to do that. I can simply say our contribution is this conversation is pretty simple, easy to jump off of. And people can engage in 2 or 3 experiences already we're making available on istthereenough.org. Because this is a blockchain show, we are going to be releasing a really cool token, which will be built around a media entity and which people will have a stake in by holding tokens and things like that. And we're prepared to put a lot of capital, more than normally would be done, on creating an audience for this over the next 12 months or so. And what we hope to do is have many people come in and be engaged, and a few decide to engage in some leadership with our conversation. And one of the best places people could experience that would be on our Clubhouse talks, which start in September. And if they want to, if those who are on Clubhouse, want to be participants in that, they can actually engage in conversation with us about this topic. And what we hope will occur on the Impact Launchpad side is drawing other social impact investment managers and companies that want to collaborate with us on producing a global impact investment bank, which is not owned by anybody, but which is obviously governed in a DAO fashion that's designed to fuel much, much more money to social impact than we're presently doing in much less time. The predicament of the world game on a practical financial level is that government and the international order are not capable of meeting the sustainable development goals cost that is identified already mathematically. And we know that we're missing a certain amount of money to save human lives. And so it's left to the private social impact space to pick up the slack in a way that government is not presently showing itself capable of doing. And so I hope there's going to be people listening to this that will seek us for collaboration on solving that problem, to manufacture the capital necessary for the investment in humanity. That's a real practical application of the world game.
That's excellent. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on today, Daniel. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully we can continue the conversation in the future if you'd like.
I would love that, Ethan. I think your and my sets of curiosity are bringing out some new insights. I've had many of them today, so thank you.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, Daniel. I'll be following with much interest. I just want to thank you again for your time.
Thanks so much.